Today we will analyze the various layers of suffering using an onion metaphor. By meditating a lot and pursuing a spiritual path, we remove layer after layer of suffering and expose new things all the time that are finer and finer. However, there is only a finite amount of layers in that onion, but let us now find out in detail with a diagram that I have prepared. And the diagram that I have prepared is this, onion or planet diagram. And the outmost layer of suffering is physical pain. And everyone pretty much knows this one, no matter if you pursue spirituality or not. Physical pain equals suffering for most people. When we experience pain, we do not want that pain, we want it to go away, and thus we suffer. Actually, there are two aspects to pain. First is the physical sensation, and then the mental aversion we cultivate towards that pain. The pain itself is often not that bad, but our mental reaction to the pain causes us immense suffering. When we meditate a lot and sit in meditation and maybe even sit through pain in meditation, then we notice that a lot of the suffering is actually a choice, and we remove that layer of the onion. However, there are more things that feel equally, bad to us. The next thing that usually plagues us are our feelings. Sometimes our feelings are even worse than physical pain, as they cause us mental pain, so to speak. And when we meditate even more and try to see feelings in our minds with wisdom and notice that our mental reactions are too arbitrary towards our feelings and that the suffering is more or less a choice, we can remove that layer too. We stop identifying with our feelings too much and just observe them and see them as what it is, just feelings that occur in our mind and come and go. Thus, we also remove that layer. The next thing we typically strongly identify with are our thoughts, and our thoughts can be a great source of suffering. Thus, we have to observe and inspect them with wisdom too, to remove that layer of suffering, so to speak. When we see our thoughts just as thoughts, as, more or less words or images that pop up in our minds on their own and are not us, then we too can remove that layer of suffering and can concern ourselves with even finer details about suffering. And the next thing that comes to mind is a very fine sense of liking and disliking. When we like things, we can lose them at some point. Or if we get attached to things we like, we will lose them at some point. That is just the nature of our universe. Everything that we want, everything that we have, will cease to exist at some point, and thus we suffer. When we notice that with wisdom, we can also remove that layer of suffering. And on a similar level is, of course, disliking. When we hate things or do not want things to be there, it basically follows the same mechanisms as liking. Liking and disliking are two sides of the same coin, so to speak. We can weaken and remove them both at the same time. And this is actually prescribed in the Buddhist path as the second level of awakening, when you remove or weaken liking and disliking to a significant degree. And the next layer of the onion is the suffering due to change. Everything changes all the time. Every mind moment is only there for a fraction of a second. Every thought is gone as soon as we notice it. Everything pretty much changes and vanishes all the time. And this is a very subtle kind of suffering that we can't really see when our minds aren't well developed. And the deeper we go into this onion, the more, fine layers of suffering we encounter. The outer layers remove most of our suffering. Nonetheless, we just switch it for better problems, so to speak. And the next thing is the suffering due to restlessness. And this kind of suffering is very persistent and lasts very long into a spiritual practice. It is only really removed with full awakening or full enlightenment. Restlessness will pretty much always be there. We always want things to be different than they are now. There are always things in the future, so to speak, that could fix our problems right now, and thus we strive for them. And only really when we reach enlightenment we can, see that there is nothing we can pretty much do to permanently attain happiness. And the last layer of this onion is delusion, or ignorance, or whatever you want to call it. Delusion or wrong knowledge causes us a great deal of suffering, and it is only removed at the very last step. When we think that there is something out there that could fix our problems, something external, then we won't really try hard to pursue enlightenment or things like that. And thus a delusion is the very core of this kind of onion and one of the last things we can actually remove. And this is the onion of suffering, or the planet diagram of suffering, however you want to call it. But let us now have a look at all the things on the list as an overview. First, there is pain, then feelings and thoughts, then liking and disliking, then the suffering due to change, restlessness and delusion. Those are more and more fine kinds of suffering. The outermost layers, pain and feelings and thoughts, remove most of our suffering. There's not much left when we will thaw those things with wisdom. Our everyday life will be much better. Nonetheless, there is still suffering left due to the inner layers of the onion. But the more we meditate, the more we see those things for what they actually are, and the more we can actually remove them from the equation. But let us now come to the most important point. Well, first, humans tend to only feel the strongest sensual input and the strongest sensation at any given time. And if there are painful feelings, then we notice those painful feelings as they are strongest. Once we remove them, the next layer of the onion becomes of interest. And all our senses pretty much compete for our attention all the time, and the strongest sensual input wins and deserves our attention. And we only when we get rid of one kind of suffering, we discover the next layer. The process is a lot like peeling an onion, and this is a very fitting metaphor in the West. Luckily, there is only a finite amount of layers of suffering available, so we can be done with the process at some point. And the more we meditate, the more we remove the causes of unhappiness. And the first stages, for example, remove a lot more suffering than the latter stages. Most of the suffering is actually removed with the first 1 to 3 layers. Okay, and that's pretty much it for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something and enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel and maybe even hit the bell icon and like the video. If you feel like I missed something or misrepresented something, feel free to let me know in the comment section so that other people and I can benefit from your wisdom. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.